What's up, Taiwan? I'm Joyce with news from here in Taiwan and around the world. President Lai Ching-te has used his VE Day speech to warn of the threat of authoritarianism facing Taiwan and democracies across Europe. It's the first time Taiwan has held an event to commemorate VE Day when Allied powers declared victory over Nazi Germany, ending World War II in Europe. Rick Lauert has more from Taipei.
Here in the center of Taipei, Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te is gathering foreign dignitaries and diplomats to commemorate for the first time here in Taiwan the end of World War II in Europe. Why? Well, Lai has an important message that authoritarian aggression is alive and well, and it's being felt keenly here in Taiwan as China continues to put military pressure on Taiwan to push it to accept its claims of sovereignty over the country.
台湾与欧洲 正共同面对新集权集团的威胁，我们正共同经历攸关通讯与网络安全，铺设数十年的海底电缆会遭到刻意的破坏。我们正共同经历攸关民主健全发展的选举会受到各种境外错假资讯的干扰，在我们的社会 制造刻意的对立。
This comes as Chinese President Xi Jinping joins Russian leader Vladimir Putin in Moscow to mark the same occasion. Lai here aligning himself with like-minded democracies and the rules-based international order established after World War II, and calling on them to unite in the face of rising 21st century authoritarian aggression. Alex Chen and Rick Lauert in Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
Chinese President Xi Jinping will meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow as Russia celebrates Victory Day. Upon arrival, Russian state media published an article where Xi thanked Russia for its long-standing friendship and for supporting what he called the unstoppable reunification of Taiwan with China. The Kremlin says the two leaders will talk about the war in Ukraine, tensions with the U.S., and energy cooperation. China is the biggest buyer of Russian oil, a major source of support for Moscow as it faces tough Western sanctions. For more on what Xi's trip might mean for Beijing and Moscow, Adele Brar spoke to Stephen Nagy from the International Christian University in Tokyo.
What's the significance of Chinese President Xi Jinping's visit to Russia?
Xi Jinping's to Russia is to demonstrate his support for Vladimir Putin and, of course, Russia as it celebrates its victory in World War II against how the Russians understand their role fighting against the Nazis. But it comes at a broader timing in which increasing pressure by the United States and Donald Trump through the trade war has making things very difficult for the Chinese economy and the leadership in Beijing. By heading to Moscow and participating, at least as an observer in the celebratory event, it sends a message to Washington that the Chinese can tilt towards the Russians, they can deepen their relationship, and this could complicate the United States foreign policy broader in the Indo-Pacific and in the context of Taiwan.
Media reports suggest China and Russia may sign new bilateral agreements. In which sectors are they expected to make deals?
Well, I think they're going to continue to try and work together on energy import and exports, and that means China's going to try to seek cheaper, more reliable energy from Russia. It is the closest source of reliable energy, and I think that China understands that it's in a strong position vis-a-vis Russia. Second, I think that China may look to Russia in terms of agricultural imports, as the exports from the United States into China now have tariffs. It will be increasingly important that China finds alternative food resources. China does have food security challenges, and it's a major importer of beef, pork, chicken, soybeans.
Given Russia's heightened military activity in the Taiwan Strait and South China Sea, are China and Russia likely to escalate their military posturing in the region?
I think the long-term trajectory, especially if the United States continues to put pressure both on Russia and China, is that Moscow and Beijing are going to try to find ways to coordinate and cooperate in the Indo-Pacific region, in particular the region in and around Taiwan. and the South China Sea. But I do think there's real limitations of how much the Russians would like to cooperate within this region. The reality is that they're already struggling to deal with the Ukraine conflict, and they haven't been able to put an end to the war, despite Ukraine being a much smaller country with much smaller numbers of fighting men and women. To have resources being diverted to the Indo-Pacific region, whether it's in and around Taiwan or the South China Sea, may test the limits of Russia's security interests and its capabilities to invest resources in two theaters at once.
That was Stephen Nagy of International Christian University. Germany and Israel's representative offices in Taiwan have condemned opposition Kuomintang chair Eric Zhu for drawing a comparison between President Lai Ching-te and Hitler. On the eve of Victory in Europe Day, Zhu accused President Lai of taking a page from Hitler's book and using Taiwan's judicial system to eliminate opposition parties. His remarks drew immediate criticism from the German Institute Taipei and the Israel Economic and Cultural Office in Taipei, both of which called the comparison inappropriate. In a later statement, Zhu emphasized that based on history, having a pluralistic and open political environment is key to democracy. Chip makers are bracing as Washington considers tariffs of up to 100% on their products. Officials expect what they call a good result for Taiwan, but the outcome is still uncertain. John Van Trieste reports.
For Taiwan's semiconductor factories, a bump in the road could come any day now, maybe even any hour. The Trump administration says it could put tariffs of 25 to 100% on imported semiconductors. When the Trump administration put up its tariff plan for public comment, there were just 10 responses about chips, far fewer, for example, than the roughly 300 that came in about lumber tariffs. Some observers think Trump's administration will take this as a green light for chip tariffs to move ahead. And it could get worse for Taiwan if Trump takes on a request from Seoul to exempt South Korean chips from levies. Details of a final decision may come from Washington this week, though when is hard to say. On top of this, the U.S. Department of Commerce plans to study the feasibility of ramping up domestic chip production to meet American needs. The whole situation could prove tough for a Taiwanese industry that relies on exports.
我们是业界，我们是跟着我们的客户走，布局上为了未来的一个很重要的一个立足啊，在台湾有很好的发展，有很好的 R&D， 有很好的根基了，但是我们却不得不向海外走。
Taiwan's government, though, seems optimistic.
我相信因为我们台湾的这个科技跟美国是互补的，所以这特别是在晶片这个领域是这个样子，所以我相信我们能够这个谈出一个对台湾比较好的一个结果。
But for now, everything is up in the air for an industry that just prior to Trump's election had predicted production value would grow 16.5% in 2025, breaking $192 billion US dollars.
因为现在的环境是非常动态在发展，那我们也是动态在这个模拟。
Taiwan's chip makers may soon need to reevaluate this year's prospects and work out strategies to mitigate the impact of whatever tariffs the U.S. decides on. Andy Xue and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance refutes reports that Washington is interested in making a strategic deal with Beijing that touches on Taiwan. This comes just days before the U.S. and China are set to hold their first high-level trade talks since Trump announced heavy tariffs.
So I haven't seen those reports that you mentioned, a strategic deal on Taiwan, so I wouldn't speak to that. I certainly would say that there has been no conversation between our governments about a strategic deal on that particular question. What we have talked about, of course, is that we cannot absorb the producer surplus of the entire world.
Vance was speaking at a security conference in the U.S. Capitol. On Washington's trade relations with Beijing, he said the U.S. would be looking for Chinese consumption to increase in order to balance the trade deficit of hundreds of billions of dollars. The U.S. imposed a 145% tariff on China, which responded with a 125% levy on American goods. North Korea has fired multiple short-range ballistic missiles into the sea, according to South Korea. The projectiles were launched from North Korea's east coast and landed in the Sea of Japan. Seoul says it may be tests of weapons the North is looking to export and says it's working with Japan and the U.S. to look into the launch. It comes just a week after North Korean leader Kim Jong-un inspected several weapons factories and after Pyongyang began production of a long-range rocket launcher system last month. The Philippine Navy has reported what it calls aggressive and unsafe movements by 2 Chinese Navy vessels earlier this week in the South China Sea. The encounter happened on May 5th as a Philippine vessel was conducting patrols in the Scarborough Shoal, an area claimed by both China and the Philippines. The Philippine ship issued radio warnings after the Chinese vessels started to tail it. China says the Philippine ship was, quote, attempting to invade the area and that its forces had expelled the Philippine ship. Manila says this kind of behavior raises tensions and threatens regional stability. Civilians and world leaders are calling for calm as India and Pakistan continue to trade fire over the long-disputed Kashmir region. It comes after India carried out a series of deadly strikes in Pakistan and Pakistan-controlled Kashmir, escalating an already volatile situation. Reese Ayers reports.
Pakistanis rally in the streets of Islamabad to show support for their military, recently engaged in deadly cross-border exchanges with neighbouring India, an escalating conflict that has the world on edge. It's the latest saga in the 2 countries' decades-long spat over the Kashmir region, with Pakistan saying they've already responded to Indian airstrikes that killed dozens by downing enemy fighter jets.
India is a cowardly enemy that believes it is powerful by targeting innocent people. But last night, we showed that, by the grace and mercy of God Almighty, Pakistan knows how to deliver a fitting response in its defense.
India hasn't confirmed the loss of jets, but says its responses so far have been targeted and muted, striking sites linked to terrorist groups and warning Pakistan not to take things further.
India has demonstrated considerable restraint in its response. However, it must be said that the Indian armed forces are fully prepared to respond to Pakistani misadventures, if any, that will escalate the situation.
Both sides are claiming civilian casualties, adding to the thousands that have died in the region over the years. The intensifying conflict between the 2 nuclear-armed nations is prompting calls for de-escalation around the globe.
Peace, peace, peace. No war, no war, no war.
In London, Pakistani protesters gather outside India's High Commission to rally for peace.
We don't want war because at the moment so many countries involved in a war and we like peace in this situation.
We've just been through with Palestine. Now this is happening in India and Pakistan, and it's not the loss of one country, it's loss from the both countries. And it's all the civilian and innocent people always dies between the wars.
In the United States, President Donald Trump, too, urged restraint.
We get along with both countries very well, good relationships with both, and I want to see it stop. And if I can do anything to help, I will be there.
But with both sides claiming a right to respond after each subsequent attack, there are fears that an early off-ramp for India or Pakistan is quickly slipping away. Howard Jung and Reese Ayers for TaiwanPlus.
Sailors from Palau and Taiwan have completed a historic trip in a traditional double-hulled voyaging canoe. The Alingano Maisu took 2 weeks to travel from Palau using only traditional navigation methods such as the stars, waves, and winds. It's the first voyage of its kind and is aimed at reviving an ancient connection between Taiwan's indigenous peoples and Pacific Islanders. Thank you for watching What's Up Taiwan. Be sure to visit the TaiwanPlus website and follow our social media. Finally, here's some more images of the Alingano Maisu canoe on its way to Taiwan. I'm Joyce. Take care. See you next time.
For more stories from Taiwan and around the world, follow TaiwanPlus on social media.